Good day, everyone. This is the reporting for Group 5, and I will discuss Republic Act 9147 of the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act. According to RA 9147, it shall be the policy of the state to conserve the country wildlife resources and their habitats for sustainability. Again, this is the crucial as we are witnessing more species being stressed and endangered towards their extinctions. In the pursuit of the policy, this action had the following objectives. First, to conserve and protect wildlife species and their habitats to promote ecological balance and enhance biological diversity. Second, to regulate the collection and trade of wildlife. Third, to pursue with due regard to the national interest the Philippine commitment to international conventions, protections, and wildlife and their habitats. And the last, to initiate or support is scientific studies on the conservation of biological diversity. So, what wildlife species are covered by Republic Act 9147 or the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act? Well, according to the law, the provision shall be enforceable for all wildlife species found in all areas of the country, including the habitats and the protected areas in the country. This also applies to exotic species and non-native species in the country. Under RA 9147, the jurisdictions of wildlife species shall be under these two government agencies, specifically with each agency, such as the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture. For the DENR, shall have jurisdictions over all terrestrial plants and animal species, all turtles, and wetlands species, including but not limited to crocodiles, water birds, and all amphibians and dugong. The Department of Agriculture, or DA, shall have jurisdictions over all declared aquatic critical habitats, all aquatic resources including but not limited to all fishes, aquatic plants, marine mammals except dugong.
To further learn about this law, let us look at several terminologies as defined in RA 9147. First, we have conservation. It is the preservation and sustainable utilization of wildlife and maintenance, restoration, and enhancement of the habitat. So this means it is applicable not only to plants and animals that we aim to conserve and to protect, but as the restoration of their habitat. And next, we have critically endangered species. This is referring to the species or subspecies that is facing extremely high risk of extinction in the wild. Sooner or later, due to the threats it faces, an example of a critically endangered species is the Philippine eagle in 2020. About 400 nesting pairs of the Philippine eagle remain in the wild. The next is economically important species. So these are the species that have actual or potential value in trade or utilization for commercial purposes. Next up is the endangered species. So this refers species or subspecies that is not critically endangered status, but its survival in the wild is unlikely to improve if the threats to its existence continue. One of the example of the endangered species in the Palawan Panding. The next one is endemic species. It means species or subspecies which is naturally occurring and found only within specific areas in the country, meaning to see endemic species is only found in one place or a country and not in another many places in Earth. An example of this is the Philippine tarsier. Next one is the exotic species, means species or subspecies which do not naturally occur in the country, meaning to say, a species is called exotic when it appears in a place where it is not supposed to be but has appeared due to the introduction or the bringing of a foreign species to a certain place. This exotic species can harm to local ecosystem as it establishes competition with endemic organisms.
Next up, we do have habitat. So habitat is a piece of environment where a species or subspecies naturally occur or has naturally established its population. Basically, this is a place where a species has thrived when it appeared to live and occupy the specific area. Next one is indigenous wildlife. Means species or subspecies of wildlife naturally occurring or has naturally established population in the country or region. Other words, a certain indigenous wildlife species can exist or occur and even occupy habitat in more than one places or country. Next one is threatened species. It means a general term of denote species or subspecies considered as a critically endangered, vulnerable, or other accepted categories of wildlife whose population. The next one is trade. So this means it is the act of engaging in the exchange, exportation, or importation, purchase, or sale of wildlife. Their derivatives or byproducts locally or internationally. One is the wildlife. Means wild forms and varieties of flora and fauna in all developmental stages, including those which are in captivity or are being bred or propagated. Now, let's talk about the major drivers of biodiversity loss. As well all known, biodiversity refers the variety of all organisms, the flora and fauna. They link to one another in one big web of life. However, as we take from the natural resources of our planet, biodiversity is being affected in way is being driven toward its extinction.
Let's talk about pollution. So, as we pollute the environment, not only do we disrupt the ocean, rivers, forests, and the air we breathe, but we also destroy the homes of species living in this ecosystem. The plastic pollution is one of the great examples in recent times. We see pictures of fish and the marine animals ingesting plastic and dying of it. The second one would be the climate change. Not only as humans are affected by climate change, but also the planet and animal. An example of this is the coral bleaching. It is caused by the increase of temperature of the sea and its acidification, which eventually leads to the destruction of the coral beds that are important breeding grounds of fishes. The next one is the change in land and sea use. When the purpose for the land and sea are the change for another purpose, such as road widening, building and infrastructure, denuding a forest for housing subdivision project, the habitats and ecosystem of those destructed project are damaged, that the wildlife in a certain area is disturbed and forced to move out. Next on our list, we do have the overexploitation. So this happens not just in natural resources such as mining sites, forests, ocean, but as well the species themselves. On example of species overexploitation is the legal wildlife threat which has caused the extinction of some species, also the potential risk of pandemic caused by viruses or other disease carried by certain animals increased because of the unregulated illegal wildlife trade. We do have the invasive alien species, so the invasive alien species which upon introduction to a certain place establish competition with other organisms and they dominate the ecosystem, leading to the strengthening and existing species in the species area. Now, let's proceed to the illegal acts against wildlife and the penalties and fine for the violator of the law. So in order to maximize the enforcement of the law, there must a mechanism to apprehend the violator.
Fifth, trading of wildlife. 6. Collecting, hunting, and processing wildlife, their byproduct and the derivatives. 17. Gathering of destroying of active nestless, host plants and like. 8. Maltreating and or inflicting other injuries not covered by the preceding paragraph. And lastly, transporting of wildlife. Now that we know to what acts prohibit against the wildlife in other habitats, here is our example of penalties and fines that shall be imposed. First one, if inflicted to undertaken against species, list as critical imprisonment of minimum of 6 years and 1 day to 12 years, and fine of 100,000 pesos to 1 million pesos. Second example of violators participates in undertaken against endangered species. Imprisonment of 2 years and 1 day to 4 years, and or fine 30,000 pesos and 200,000 pesos. The fines and penalties that came along with apprehension from the violation of law in just one thing, but the effect of ecosystem and species itself is another thing. To talk about this mechanism are in fact but should be abused and still wildlife matters, and they should never be subjected by the cruelty is great of humans. I hope learn a lot from this Republic Act 9147, which is Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act.